In a world where first impressions can make or break someone's entire future, imagine walking into a room where every eye judges you before you even speak. Picture the whispers, the sideways glances, the immediate assumptions about who you are based solely on what they see on the surface. Now imagine that beneath those judging stares lies a story so powerful, so extraordinary, that it would silence every critic and turn every whisper into applause. This is the story of Maya Rodriguez, a woman whose ink-covered skin told tales of courage that most people would never dare to live. In coffee shops, job interviews, and grocery stores, people saw the tattoos first and the person never. They made their judgments quickly, completely unaware that they were looking at someone who had served their country with honor, faced death without flinching, and earned respect in one of the most elite military units in the world. What happens when society's prejudices collide with extraordinary truth? When the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the hero they never saw coming. This is that story, raw, real, and absolutely unforgettable. Maya Rodriguez stepped off the Greyhound bus in the small town of Millfield, Ohio, carrying everything she owned in a worn military duffel bag. The late afternoon sun caught the intricate tattoos that covered her arms, neck, and hands, a canvas of memories that told stories most people would never understand. As she walked down Main Street looking for the address scribbled on a piece of paper, she noticed the stares immediately. An elderly woman clutched her purse tighter and crossed to the other side of the street. A group of teenagers pointed and whispered, their phones already out to capture what they probably thought was Instagram-worthy content about the tattooed freak who had just arrived in their quiet town. Maya had experienced this reaction countless times over the past 2 years since leaving the military, but it never stopped stinging. The address led her to a small diner called Rosie's Place, where she was supposed to meet her new landlord about a studio apartment above the hardware store next door. Maya pushed through the glass door, and the conversations inside immediately died down. Forks paused midway to mouths, coffee cups were set down a little too carefully, and every head turned in her direction. She approached the counter where a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes was wiping down the surface. This had to be Rosie, based on the name tag and the way she seemed to own the space around her. "Excuse me," Maya said, her voice steady despite the uncomfortable atmosphere. "I'm looking for Tom Harrison. We were supposed to meet here about an apartment." Rosie looked her up and down, taking in the full-sleeve tattoos, the smaller pieces on her hands, and the visible ink on her neck that disappeared beneath her collar. Maya could practically see the wheels turning in the woman's mind, making the same assumptions everyone else made. "Tom's running late," Rosie said finally, her tone neutral but not unfriendly. "You can wait if you want. Coffee's $2. Maya nodded and took a seat at the counter, pulling out exact change. She ordered black coffee and sat quietly, trying to ignore the conversations that had resumed around her in hushed tones. She caught fragments of words, covered in tattoos, probably trouble, don't know what kind of people they're letting into town these days. 20 minutes later, a heavy-set man in his 50s walked through the door. He scanned the diner, and his eyes landed on Maya. His expression immediately changed from neutral to wary, and she knew this was Tom Harrison before he even approached. "You Maya?" he asked, making no attempt to hide his surprise at her appearance. "Yes, sir," she replied, standing up and extending her hand. He shook it reluctantly, his grip weak and brief. "Let's make this quick," Tom said, already heading toward the door. "I've got other appointments today." They walked the short distance to the hardware store, and Tom led her up a narrow staircase to a small studio apartment. It was clean but sparse, a Murphy bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a single window that looked out over the main street. The rent was reasonable, and Maya had first month's rent plus deposit ready in cash. "I'll be honest with you," Tom said, crossing his arms. "I'm not sure you're what we're looking for in this building. This is a quiet, family-friendly area." Maya felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. She had honorably served her country for 8 years, including 3 deployments in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She had saved lives, protected fellow service members, and earned commendations that most people could only dream of. But all this man could see were the tattoos. "Mr. Harrison," she said calmly, "I can provide references from my previous landlord in San Diego. I've never been late on rent, never caused any disturbances, and I keep my living spaces immaculate. I'm quiet, respectful, and I mind my own business." Tom looked skeptical. "What kind of work do you do?" I'm between jobs right now, but I have savings and I'm actively looking. I can pay 6 months rent up front if that would make you more comfortable. The mention of 6 months rent up front made Tom's eyebrows raise slightly. He walked around the small space again, clearly wrestling with his assumptions versus the practical appeal of guaranteed income. I don't know, he said finally. Let me think about it. I'll call you tomorrow. Maya handed him her contact information and walked back down to the street. She knew she wouldn't get that apartment. It was the same story that had played out in 5 different cities over the past 2 years. Her military savings were running low, and she was tired of being judged before people even knew her name. She decided to get something to eat before catching the next bus out of town. There didn't seem to be many options on Main Street besides Rosie's place, so she walked back to the diner. When she entered, she noticed that several of the same customers were still there, and the conversations quieted again. Maya took the same seat at the counter and ordered a burger and fries. Rosie served her without comment, but Maya could feel the woman's curious gaze. As she ate, Maya overheard a conversation at a nearby table between 2 men who appeared to be local business owners. I'm telling you, Mike, we need to do something about the homeless situation downtown, one of them was saying. It's getting out of hand, and it's bad for business. What do you suggest? The other man replied. The city council says they don't have funding for additional services. Maybe we could organize something ourselves. Get the community involved. There's got to be people willing to help. Maya finished her meal and was preparing to leave when she heard the diner door chime again. A commotion outside caught everyone's attention, shouting and what sounded like a struggle. Through the large window, Maya could see a man in tattered clothes stumbling down the sidewalk, clearly in distress. He appeared to be having some kind of medical episode. Most of the diner patrons pressed against the windows to watch, but nobody moved to help. Maya didn't hesitate. She was out the door and at the man's side in seconds, her military medic training kicking in automatically. The man was in his 60s, clearly homeless based on his appearance, and he was having what looked like a severe diabetic episode. His skin was clammy, he was confused and disoriented, and his speech was slurred. Maya quickly assessed his condition while trying to calm him down. Sir, can you tell me your name? She asked, supporting his weight as he swayed unsteadily. Jimmy, he mumbled. Feels sick. Really sick. Okay, Jimmy, I'm going to help you. When did you last eat? Don't remember. Maybe yesterday. Maya looked back at the crowd that had gathered from the diner and the surrounding businesses. Someone call 911, she said firmly. And I need orange juice or something with sugar in it right now. Rosie appeared at her elbow with a glass of orange juice. Here, she said, handing it to Maya. Thank you, Maya said, then turned back to Jimmy. I need you to drink this slowly. Small sips. She guided the glass to his lips and helped him drink while monitoring his condition. Within a few minutes, his color started to improve and his confusion began to clear. By the time the paramedics arrived, Jimmy was stable and coherent. You did good, the lead paramedic told Maya as they prepared to transport Jimmy to the hospital. Your quick thinking probably saved his life. Are you in the medical field? Former military medic, Maya replied simply. After the ambulance left, Maya found herself surrounded by the same people who had been staring at her with suspicion just an hour earlier. Their expressions had changed completely. That was incredible, one woman said. I've never seen anyone react so fast. Where did you learn to do that? Another person asked. How did you know what was wrong with him? Maya answered their questions politely, but briefly. She wasn't used to positive attention, and she certainly wasn't comfortable being the center of it. After a few minutes, the crowd dispersed, but she noticed people looking at her differently now. Back inside the diner, Rosie poured Maya a fresh cup of coffee without being asked. That was something else, Rosie said, shaking her head. Poor Jimmy's had episodes like that before, but nobody ever knew what to do. Most people just walked past him. He needed help, Maya said simply. Anyone with basic medical training would have done the same thing. Maybe, Rosie said, but you didn't walk past. You saw someone in need, and you acted. That says something about a person. Maya finished her coffee and paid her bill, leaving a generous tip. As she gathered her bag to leave, Rosie spoke again. Where are you headed now? Next bus out of town, I guess. Doesn't look like the apartment is going to work out. Rosie was quiet for a moment, then said, Tom Harrison's not a bad man, but he's set in his ways. This town's not used to people who look different. But what you did out there today, that's who you really are. Some people can see that, and some people can't. Maya nodded and headed for the door. She had learned not to expect small towns to see past appearances, and She had made peace with that reality. But, as she walked back toward the bus station, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in Millfield that afternoon. Her phone rang just as she reached the station. It was Tom Harrison. Maya? Look, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier, and I might have been too hasty. A few people mentioned what you did for Jimmy today. Maybe we could try a month-to-month arrangement, see how it goes. Maya was surprised but cautious. Are you sure, Mr. Harrison? I don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. Let's just say you've given me reason to reconsider my first impression. Can you come by tomorrow morning? We'll get the paperwork done. After hanging up, Maya sat on the bench outside the bus station and looked back down Main Street. Maybe Millfield would be different. Maybe this time, she'd have a chance to show people who she really was before they decided who they thought she should be. She shouldered her duffel bag and walked back toward town, ready to give this small Ohio community, and herself, another chance that Maya's first week in Millfield passed quietly. She settled into the small studio apartment, establishing a routine that revolved around job hunting during the day and evening runs through the quiet residential streets. The incident with Jimmy had earned her some grudging respect from a few locals, but most people still gave her a wide berth when she walked through town. Every morning, she stopped by Rosie's place for coffee and breakfast. Rosie had warmed up to her considerably, engaging in small talk about the weather and town events. Maya learned that Rosie had run the diner for 23 years, ever since her husband died, and left her with 2 teenage daughters to raise. The diner had been their lifeline, and Rosie took pride in being a gathering place for the community. You seem different from what I expected, Rosie said one morning as she refilled Maya's coffee cup. Different how? Quieter. More thoughtful. I guess I had ideas about people with tattoos being loud and aggressive. Maya smiled slightly. The tattoos tell stories, but they don't define my personality. Most people don't bother to find that out. What do yours mean? If you don't mind me asking. Maya looked down at the intricate designs covering her forearms. Each piece represented a memory, a mission, a fallen comrade, or a moment that had changed her life. But explaining that would require sharing more about herself than she was ready for. They're personal reminders, she said simply. Things I don't want to forget. Rosie nodded, understanding that some stories weren't ready to be told. Maya's job search wasn't going well. She had applied to every business in town, the hardware store, the grocery store, the gas station, even the small medical clinic. Her military experience should have been an asset, but she rarely made it past the initial interview. The tattoos were a barrier that her qualifications couldn't overcome. On Thursday afternoon, she was walking back from another unsuccessful interview when she heard shouting from the direction of the elementary school. Maya quickened her pace and saw a crowd gathered around the school playground. A young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, had somehow gotten stuck halfway up a tall oak tree that bordered the school property. Tommy, don't move, a woman was calling up to him. Maya could see she was one of the teachers, and she looked terrified. The fire department is on their way. Maya assessed the situation quickly. The boy was about 15 feet up, caught in a fork between 2 branches. He was scared and starting to panic, which was making him move more and put himself in greater danger. The fire truck was nowhere in sight, and every second that passed increased the risk that he would fall. Without hesitation, Maya dropped her bag and approached the tree. She had climbed much more difficult terrain during her military training, often while carrying heavy equipment and under hostile fire. This oak tree, while tall, offered plenty of handholds and stable branches. Excuse me, she said to the teacher who seemed to be in charge. I can get him down safely. The woman looked at Maya with a mixture of hope and concern. Are you sure? It's really high, and if something happened to you too. I've done this kind of thing before, Maya said calmly. What's the boy's name? Tommy Brennan. Maya called up to the boy. Hey Tommy, my name is Maya. I'm coming up to help you get down, okay? The boy looked down at her with wide, frightened eyes. Maya could see he was trying not to cry. She started climbing, moving slowly and deliberately. Each movement was calculated and precise. As she got closer to Tommy, she kept talking to him in a calm, reassuring voice. You did a great job climbing up here, Tommy. That takes real skill. Now I'm going to show you how to get down just as safely. When she reached him, Maya positioned herself on a stable branch just below where he was stuck. I'm going to help guide your feet to the right places, and then we're going to climb down together, one branch at a time. Can you do that with me? Tommy nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. The descent took about 10 minutes. Maya went first, positioning herself below Tommy at each step and guiding his feet to secure footholds. She kept up a steady stream of encouraging conversation, treating him like a capable partner rather than a helpless victim. When they finally reached the ground, Tommy ran straight into the arms of his teacher, Miss Peterson. The crowd that had gathered, teachers, parents, and curious passers-by, broke into spontaneous applause. "That was amazing," Miss Peterson said, approaching Maya with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Maya replied, brushing dirt off her hands. "I'm just glad he's okay." As the crowd began to disperse, Maya noticed a woman standing slightly apart from the group, watching her intently. The woman appeared to be in her 40s, with short, graying hair and an air of authority. She approached Maya as she picked up her bag. "That was impressive," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Sarah Chun, the school principal. I don't believe we've met." "Maya Rodriguez. I just moved to town last week. I heard about what you did for Jimmy downtown. Now this. You seem to have a knack for helping people in crisis situations." Maya shrugged. "Right place, right time, I suppose." Sarah studied her for a moment. "What kind of work are you looking for? If you don't mind me asking." "Anything, really. I've been applying around town, but haven't had much luck." "What's your background?" Maya hesitated. This conversation was heading in a direction that usually didn't end well for her. But something about Sarah's direct manner encouraged honesty. "Military. 8 years. I was a medic and spent time in special operations support." Sarah's eyebrows raised. "Special operations? That's impressive. What branch?" "Navy. And now you're looking for work in Millfield, Ohio. That's quite a transition." "Sometimes life takes you places you don't expect," Maya said carefully. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in substitute teaching? We're always short on subs, especially for physical education and health classes. Your military background and obvious ability to stay calm in crisis situations would be valuable assets." Maya was taken aback. It had been months since anyone had offered her a legitimate job opportunity. "I don't have a teaching degree," she said. "You don't need one for substitute work, just a high school diploma and a clean background check. The state has an emergency certification program for qualified candidates. I could put you in touch with the right people." "Why would you do that?" "You barely know me." Sarah smiled. "I know you climbed a tree to save a scared kid when everyone else was standing around wringing their hands. I know you helped Jimmy when he was having a medical emergency. That tells me more about your character than a resume ever could." That evening, Maya sat in her studio apartment thinking about the unexpected job offer. Teaching had never occurred to her as a possibility, but the more she thought about it, the more appealing it seemed. She had always been good with young people during her community outreach work in the military, and she understood the value of discipline, physical fitness, and mental toughness. Her phone rang around 8 o'clock. The caller ID showed Tom Harrison's number. "Maya? Tom Harrison here. I wanted to call and thank you for what you did at the school today. My nephew Tommy called his grandmother, and she called me. He can't stop talking about how brave and calm you were." "He was the brave one, Mr. Harrison. I just helped him get down safely." "Well, I appreciate what you did. And I want you to know that having you in the building has been no trouble at all. You're a good tenant, and I'm glad I changed my mind about renting to you." After hanging up, Maya realized this was the first time in 2 years that she felt like she might actually belong somewhere. The job at the school wasn't guaranteed yet, but Sarah Chin's offer had given her something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. She decided to take a walk through downtown to clear her head. Main Street was quiet at this hour, with most businesses closed and only a few cars passing through. As she walked past Rosie's place, she saw that the lights were still on, and Rosie was inside, apparently doing paperwork at one of the tables. Maya tapped on the glass door, and Rosie looked up with a smile, gesturing for her to come in. "Working late?" Maya asked. "Monthly inventory," Rosie replied with a sigh. "It's a necessary evil. I heard about what you did at the school today. The whole town's talking about it. I hope that's not a bad thing." "Are you kidding? People are impressed. My afternoon customers couldn't stop discussing it. Mrs. Brennan, Tommy's grandmother, stopped by specifically to ask about you. She wanted to know if I knew how to get in touch with you so she could thank you properly." Maya sat down across from Rosie at the table covered with invoices and order forms. "It's strange," Maya said. "I've been in town for a week, and people have been suspicious of me the whole time because of how I look. But the moment there's a crisis, suddenly, appearance doesn't matter anymore." "That's human nature, I suppose," Rosie said. "People judge what they can see until they see what people can do. The school principal offered me a job. Substitute teaching. Sarah Chun. She's good people. Smart as a whip and doesn't make decisions lightly. If she offered you work, It's because she sees something in you. I just hope I don't disappoint her. Or the community. Rosie looked at her seriously. Maya, in the short time you've been here, you've saved one man's life and helped a scared kid out of a dangerous situation. You've been nothing but polite and respectful to everyone you've met. The only people you might disappoint are the ones who can't see past their own prejudices. What if there are more of those people than there are of the open-minded ones? Then, that's their loss, not yours. You can't control what people think, but you can control how you respond to it. From what I've seen, you respond with grace and action. That's more than most people manage. Maya helped Rosie finish her inventory, and they talked about the town, its history, and its people. Maya learned that Millfield had struggled economically for years as manufacturing jobs moved elsewhere, leaving behind a community that was sometimes suspicious of change and outsiders. But there were good people here, Rosie assured her. People who would judge her by her actions rather than her appearance once they got to know her. Walking back to her apartment, Maya felt more optimistic about her future than she had in months. She was beginning to understand that earning a place in a community like Millfield wouldn't happen overnight, but it wasn't impossible either. It would require patience, consistency, and the willingness to prove herself one interaction at a time. As she climbed the stairs to her studio, Maya made a decision. She would take the substitute teaching job if it was offered to her, and she would give this town every reason to be proud that she had chosen to make it her home. The tattoos would always be there, and some people would always judge her for them. But maybe, with time and persistence, she could show Millfield that there was much more to Maya Rodriguez than what they could see on the surface. Her military training had taught her that the most important battles weren't always fought with weapons. Sometimes they were fought with patience, determination, and the quiet courage to keep showing up even when the odds seemed stacked against you. This felt like one of those battles, and Maya Rodriguez had never been one to back down from a fight. 3 weeks into her substitute teaching position at Millfield Elementary, Maya had found her rhythm. The emergency certification process had gone smoothly, much to Sarah Chin's satisfaction, and Maya was covering classes 3 to 4 days a week. The children had taken to her immediately. Her calm authority and genuine interest in their well-being reminded many of them of military parents or relatives they knew. However, not everyone in the community had warmed up to her presence. A small but vocal group of parents had begun expressing concerns about having someone with visible tattoos working with their children. The concerns were couched in diplomatic language about appropriate role models and professional appearance standards, but Maya understood the underlying message clearly. The situation came to a head on a Wednesday morning when Maya was called to substitute for the 5th grade physical education class. As she was leading the children through warm-up exercises in the gymnasium, she noticed 2 women standing in the doorway, watching her intently. She recognized one of them as Mrs. Patricia Wellington, whose son Brandon was in the class. The other woman was unfamiliar, but her expression suggested she wasn't there for a friendly visit. After class, the women approached Maya as she was organizing the sports equipment. "Miss Rodriguez," Mrs. Wellington said, her tone coolly polite. "I'm Patricia Wellington, Brandon's mother. This is my friend, Carol Stevens. She's president of the Parent-Teacher Association." Maya straightened up and faced them. "Nice to meet you both. How can I help you?" Carol Stevens stepped forward, her posture rigid with apparent disapproval. "We wanted to speak with you about some concerns that have been raised by several parents regarding your suitability as a role model for our children." "What specific concerns?" Maya asked, keeping her voice level. "Well, it's the tattoos, obviously," Mrs. Wellington said, gesturing at Maya's exposed arms. "Some parents feel that extensive body art sends the wrong message to impressionable young people." "What message would that be?" Carol Stevens cleared her throat. "That it's acceptable to permanently mark your body with images that could be interpreted as aggressive or inappropriate. Children are very influenced by the adults they encounter in school settings." Maya looked down at her arms, where intricate designs told the story of her military service. There was the compass rose on her left forearm, representing her navigation training. The crossed medical symbols honored her role as a combat medic. The memorial piece on her right shoulder commemorated 3 fellow service members who had died in action. None of it was aggressive or inappropriate, but she understood that these women would never see the meaning behind the images. "Mrs. Stevens," Maya said carefully, "I understand your concerns about role models for children. In the 3 weeks I've been working here, have you received any complaints about my conduct with the students? Any reports of inappropriate behavior or poor judgment?" The two women exchanged glances. Well, no, Mrs. Wellington admitted. But appearance matters. Children notice these things. You're absolutely right that children notice things, Maya agreed. They notice when adults treat them with respect. They notice when someone takes time to help them learn new skills or encourages them when they're struggling. They notice when adults keep them safe and create an environment where they can succeed. That may be true, Carol Stevens said, but we still feel that someone in your position should maintain certain standards of professional appearance. Before Maya could respond, she heard a familiar voice from behind her. What kind of standards are we talking about, Carol? All three women turned to see Sarah Chun approaching from the gymnasium entrance. The principal's expression was neutral, but Maya could sense an undercurrent of tension in her voice. Oh, Sarah, Carol Stevens said, suddenly, looking less confident. We were just having a discussion with Miss Rodriguez about professional appearance expectations. I see, Sarah said. And what specific policies has Miss Rodriguez violated? There was a moment of awkward silence. Well, there's no specific policy, Mrs. Wellington said finally. But surely you can understand our position. Some of the other parents are uncomfortable with their children being exposed to such extensive tattoos. Sarah nodded slowly. I appreciate parents who are engaged in their children's education. However, I need to be clear about something. Miss Rodriguez was hired because of her qualifications, her character, and her ability to connect with students. She has consistently demonstrated excellent judgment, maintained appropriate boundaries, and shown genuine care for the children in her classes. But what about the influence on the children? Carol Stevens pressed. What about it? Sarah replied. Miss Rodriguez saved a child who was stuck in a tree. She provided emergency medical care to a man who could have died on our main street. She's been patient, professional, and effective in every classroom assignment I've given her. If that's the kind of influence we're worried about, then I'd like to see more of it. Maya felt a surge of gratitude towards Sarah, but she also recognized that this confrontation was about more than just her employment. This was about whether the community of Millfield was ready to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance. Ladies, Maya said, addressing both women directly, I understand that my appearance makes some people uncomfortable. I've experienced that reaction my entire adult life. But I want you to know that every mark on my body represents something meaningful to me. They're not rebellious statements or attempts to shock anyone. They're personal reminders of experiences that shaped who I am. She rolled up her sleeves slightly to reveal the compass rose tattoo more clearly. This compass represents my commitment to finding the right path, even when circumstances are difficult. I earned it during navigation training that pushed me to my limits physically and mentally. When I look at it, I remember the importance of staying oriented toward your goals no matter what obstacles you face. She indicated the medical symbols on her other arm. These represent the oath I took to preserve life and provide care to anyone who needed it, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Every time I see them, I remember that my primary responsibility is to help others, especially when they're vulnerable. Mrs. Wellington and Carol Stevens listened, but their expressions remained skeptical. That's all very nice, Carol Stevens said, but the fact remains that many parents are uncomfortable with this situation. We're not questioning your character, but your appearance simply doesn't align with our community standards. Maya felt her patience beginning to fray, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the school's front entrance. Shouts and the sound of running footsteps echoed through the hallways. Sarah Chun immediately moved toward the noise, with Maya close behind. Mrs. Wellington and Carol Stevens followed at a distance. In the main corridor, they found a scene of chaos. A man in his 30s, clearly agitated and smelling strongly of alcohol, was shouting at the school secretary while several teachers tried to calm him down. Maya could see immediately that this was a potentially dangerous situation. Where is she? The man was yelling. I want to see my daughter right now. You can't keep her from me. The school secretary, Mrs. Davis, was trying to maintain composure while reaching for the phone, presumably to call for help. Sir, you need to calm down, and we need to follow proper procedures. Don't tell me about procedures, the man shouted, taking a step toward her. I have rights. She's my kid. Maya assessed the situation quickly. The man was intoxicated, emotionally unstable, and becoming increasingly aggressive. There were children in nearby classrooms who could be put at risk if this escalated. The teachers present were clearly out of their depth, and it would take several minutes for police to arrive even if they had been called immediately. Without hesitation, Maya stepped forward, positioning herself between the man and Mrs. Davis. "Sir," she said in a calm but authoritative voice, "I need you to take a step back and lower your voice. There are children in this building who are being frightened by the shouting." The man turned his attention to Maya, his eyes focusing on her with difficulty. "Who are you? Get out of my way." "My name is Maya, and I work here." "What's your name?" "None of your business," he slurred. But Maya's calm demeanor seemed to have momentarily defused his anger. "I understand you want to see your daughter," Maya continued, taking a small step closer, but keeping her body language non-threatening. "What's her name?" "Lily. Lily Hoffman." "They won't let me see her." Maya glanced quickly at Sarah, who nodded slightly. Maya knew this meant there was probably a custody situation or restraining order involved. "I can see that you love Lily very much," Maya said. "That's clear from how important this is to you. But, right now, you're upset, and you've been drinking. That's not the best time to visit with your daughter, is it?" The man's aggression seemed to waver as Maya's words sank in. "I just want to see her," he said, and, for the first time, his voice contained pain rather than anger. "I understand," Maya said. "But the best thing you can do for Lily right now is to leave school property voluntarily and get some help dealing with whatever is causing you so much pain. If you make me call the police, that's not going to help your situation with custody or visitation." The man looked around the corridor, seeming to notice for the first time how many people were watching him. Maya could see him beginning to realize how his behavior must look. "This isn't over," he said finally, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "It doesn't have to be a confrontation at all," Maya replied. "But it needs to end here, today, with you making the right choice." After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, the man turned and walked toward the exit. Maya followed at a distance to ensure he actually left the building and wasn't waiting outside to cause further problems. When she returned to the corridor, she found Sarah Chun, the teachers, and several parents who had witnessed the incident all looking at her with expressions of amazement. "How did you do that?" Mrs. Davis asked, her voice still shaky from the encounter. "I was sure he was going to become violent." "De-escalation training," Maya replied simply. "Sometimes people just need to feel heard and understood before they can make better choices." Sarah Chin approached her with obvious relief. "That could have been a disaster. The man has been having issues with alcohol and depression since his divorce, and there's a restraining order that prevents him from being on school property. We've had problems with him before, but they've never been resolved so peacefully." As the crowd began to disperse and normal activities resumed, Maya noticed that Mrs. Wellington and Carol Stevens were still standing nearby, having witnessed the entire incident. Their expressions had changed significantly from the disapproving looks they had worn during their earlier conversation. Carol Stevens approached Maya hesitantly. "Miss Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. What you just did was remarkable. You kept everyone safe while still treating that man with dignity and compassion." Mrs. Wellington nodded in agreement. "I was wrong to focus on your appearance instead of your character. My son Brandon has mentioned several times how much he enjoys your classes and how you've helped him become more confident in physical activities." Maya accepted their apologies graciously, but she could see that the incident had opened their eyes to something they hadn't considered before. Her tattoos hadn't made her less capable of protecting their children. They were simply part of the complex person who had just demonstrated skills that could have saved lives. "I appreciate your words," Maya said, "but I want you to understand something important. Every person deserves to be judged by their actions and character rather than their appearance. That includes the man who was just here. He's not a bad person. He's a person dealing with bad circumstances. It includes me, and it includes your children too." Sarah Chin spoke up. "If anyone wants to discuss Miss Rodriguez's continued employment at this school, they're welcome to schedule an appointment with me. But after what I witnessed here today, I can tell you that she has my complete confidence and support." As Maya walked back toward the gymnasium to finish preparing for her next class, she reflected on how quickly the day had changed course. An hour ago, she had been defending her right to work with children despite her tattoos. Now, she had demonstrated that her unique combination of skills and experience made her exactly the kind of person they needed in their school. The tattoos were still there, as visible as ever. But, maybe, finally, people were beginning to understand that the most important things about a person aren't written on their skin. They're revealed through their actions when it matters most. Word of Maya's handling of the school crisis spread quickly through Millfield. By that evening, the story had been discussed in every business, shared over dinner tables, and debated in the coffee shop conversations that shaped public opinion in small towns. The narrative began to shift from suspicion about the tattooed stranger to curiosity about the woman who seemed to appear whenever people needed help most. The change was subtle but noticeable. When Maya stopped by Rosie's place for her usual morning coffee, conversations didn't halt the moment she entered. A few customers nodded in greeting, and one elderly man even thanked her for what she had done at the school. It was progress, but Maya knew that acceptance in a tight-knit community was a gradual process that required sustained effort and consistency. Her teaching assignments increased as well. Sarah Chun began requesting Maya specifically for difficult classes or situations that required a firm but compassionate hand. Maya found herself working almost every day, covering everything from physical education to health classes to emergency substituting for teachers who called in sick. It was during one of these assignments that Maya encountered her biggest challenge yet. She was covering a high school health class when the lesson plan called for a unit on drug and alcohol awareness. As she reviewed the curriculum the night before, Maya realized this would require her to discuss topics that hit very close to home: addiction, peer pressure, and the long-term consequences of poor decisions. The next morning, she faced a classroom of 16 and 17-year-olds who were clearly more interested in their phones than in listening to another adult lecture them about the dangers of substance abuse. Maya had seen this disengaged attitude before and knew that traditional teaching methods wouldn't work with this group. How many of you have been lectured about drugs and alcohol by adults who have never used them? Maya asked, abandoning the planned lesson entirely. Several hands went up, along with some smirks and eye rolls. Right, Maya said. So you've heard from people who've read about these things in books or learned about them in training seminars, but you've never heard from someone who actually knows what she's talking about from personal experience. The room got noticeably quieter. Maya had their attention now. I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone in this town, she continued. When I left the military 2 years ago, I had a serious drinking problem. Not social drinking, not weekend partying. I mean serious, daily drinking that was destroying my life and my relationships. Complete silence. Even the phones had been put away. I spent 8 years in the Navy, including time in special operations. I saw things and did things that most people can't imagine. When I came back to civilian life, I didn't know how to process those experiences, and I didn't ask for help when I should have. Instead, I tried to numb the pain with alcohol. Maya walked slowly around the classroom as she spoke, making eye contact with different students. Within 6 months of leaving the military, I had lost my apartment, my savings, and most of my friends. I was sleeping in my car and drinking breakfast from a bottle. I thought I had my drinking under control, but control was just an illusion. A girl in the front row raised her hand tentatively. What changed? I woke up one morning in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there, Maya said. A police officer told me I had been found unconscious in a park at 2 in the morning. A jogger had called 911 because she thought I was dead. The doctor said my blood alcohol level was high enough to have killed me. The room was so quiet that Maya could hear the clock ticking on the wall. That was my moment of clarity. I realized that I had 2 choices: get help or die. So I chose to get help. I spent 60 days in a rehabilitation facility, learning how to deal with trauma without using alcohol as a crutch. A boy in the back of the room spoke up. Is that where you got the tattoos? Maya smiled slightly. No, these came from my military service. Each one represents something meaningful from that part of my life. But I understand why you might think that. A lot of people assume that tattoos are associated with rebellion or poor decision-making. She rolled up her sleeve to show the compass rose tattoo more clearly. This compass reminds me to stay oriented toward my goals, especially when life gets difficult. When I was drinking, I lost sight of my direction completely. This helps me remember that I always have a choice about which path to take. She indicated another piece on her forearm, an anchor surrounded by rope work. This represents stability and being grounded. In the military, we used to say that an anchor keeps you steady even when the seas are rough. When I got sober, I realized I needed anchors in my civilian life too. People, activities, and principles that would keep me stable when things got hard. A different student asked, "Do you still want to drink?" Maya considered the question carefully. Sometimes, addiction doesn't just disappear because you decide you want to be sober. It's something I have to think about every day. But I've learned strategies for dealing with stress and trauma that are healthier and more effective than alcohol ever was. For the next hour, the students asked questions with a level of engagement Maya had rarely seen in a classroom. They wanted to know about military service, about addiction recovery, about making decisions when you're young that might affect your entire life. Maya answered honestly, sharing experiences she had never discussed with anyone outside of therapy. When the class ended, several students lingered to continue the conversation. Maya realized that by being vulnerable about her struggles, she had accomplished something that months of traditional health education might never achieve. She had made these young people think seriously about the real consequences of the choices they were making. However, Maya's decision to share her personal story had unintended consequences. By that afternoon, word had spread throughout the school that the substitute teacher had admitted to being an alcoholic. The story grew and changed as it passed from person to person, and by evening, exaggerated versions were circulating throughout the community. Maya's phone rang around 8 o'clock. It was Sarah Chun. "Maya, I need to talk to you about what happened in your health class today. Can you come to my office first thing tomorrow morning?" Maya felt her stomach sink. She had known that sharing her story was a risk, but she had believed it was the right thing to do for those students. Now it seemed like her honesty might cost her the job she had come to love. The next morning, Maya arrived at the school to find several cars already in the parking lot, including one she recognized as belonging to Carol Stevens. Her heart sank further as she realized this was likely going to be another confrontation about her suitability to work with children. In Sarah's office, she found not only the principal and Carol Stevens, but also Mrs. Wellington, Tom Harrison, Rosie, and two other parents she didn't recognize. Everyone looked serious, and Maya prepared herself for the worst. "Maya," Sarah began, "we've heard reports about your discussion with the health class yesterday. Before we go any further, I want you to tell us exactly what you shared with those students." Maya took a deep breath and recounted the conversation honestly, explaining her reasoning for departing from the planned curriculum and sharing personal experiences. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Carol Stevens spoke first. "So you told a group of high school students that you're an alcoholic." "I told them that I had struggled with alcohol addiction after leaving the military, and that I got treatment and have been sober for 18 months, Maya clarified. "Why would you think that was appropriate?" one of the parents asked. "Because those students have heard a dozen lectures from adults who have never faced the challenges they're facing," Maya replied. "They needed to hear from someone who understood what it actually means to make poor choices and deal with the consequences." Tom Harrison, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Maya, can I ask you something? When you rented the apartment from me, were you drinking then?" "No, sir. I had been sober for about 4 months at that point." "Have you been drinking since you moved to Millfield?" "No, sir." Rosie leaned forward in her chair. "Maya, you've been coming to my diner almost every morning for over a month. I've never seen any signs that you were drinking or had been drinking." "That's correct," Maya confirmed. Mrs. Wellington looked uncomfortable but determined. "I have to ask, are there other things about your past that we should know about? I mean, if you struggle with alcohol, what else might there be?" Maya felt a flash of anger at the implication, but she controlled her voice carefully. "Mrs. Wellington, I understand your concern for your children's safety, but I need to point out that being in recovery from addiction doesn't make someone dangerous or unreliable. In fact, it often makes them more aware of their responsibilities and more committed to making positive choices." Sarah Chun had been listening to the exchange without comment, but now she spoke up. "Maya, I have a question about your military service. Your resume mentions special operations support, but it doesn't give many details. Can you be more specific about what that involved?" Maya hesitated. This was the question she had hoped to avoid, the one that would require her to reveal parts of her past that she wasn't ready to share with anyone, let alone a room full of people who were already questioning her judgment. "I provided medical support for special operations teams," she said carefully. "What kind of teams?" Sarah pressed. Maya looked around the room at the expectant faces and realized that she had reached a crossroads. She could continue to deflect questions about her military service and hope that her work in the community would speak for itself. Or she could trust these people with the truth and hope they would understand why she had been so reluctant to discuss her background. She thought about the students in yesterday's health class and how her honesty had opened up a conversation that might genuinely help them make better decisions. Maybe it was time to take the same risk with the adults in this room. "I was a Navy SEAL," Maya said quietly. The silence that followed was different from the previous pauses in the conversation. This wasn't awkward silence. This was stunned silence. Carol Stevens was the first to find her voice. "You were a Navy SEAL? But women aren't." "Women weren't officially allowed in SEAL teams until 2016, Maya said. "But I was part of a pilot program that began several years earlier. Very few people knew about it at the time." Tom Harrison stared at her. You're telling us you're one of the first female Navy SEALs. I'm telling you that I served with SEAL Team 7 for 3 years, specializing in combat medicine and close quarters combat. I deployed to Afghanistan twice and Syria once. I earned commendations for valor under fire and saved the lives of more than a dozen team members during those deployments. The room was completely silent now. Maya could see people trying to process this information and reconcile it with their assumptions about who she was. Why didn't you tell us this before? Sarah asked. Because I learned a long time ago that when people hear Navy SEAL, they either don't believe it or they put you on a pedestal, Maya replied. Neither reaction is helpful when you're just trying to live your life and do good work. I wanted people to judge me based on who I am now, not on what I used to do. Rosie shook her head slowly. Maya, honey, you saved Jimmy's life, helped Tommy out of that tree, handled that drunk man at the school, and connected with those students yesterday. We already were judging you based on who you are now. This just explains why you were so good at all of it. Carol Stevens looked embarrassed. I owe you another apology. Here I was questioning whether you were a suitable role model for our children, and you're actually a war hero. I'm not a war hero, Maya said firmly. I'm just someone who did her job in difficult circumstances. The same way I'm trying to do my job now. The revelation about Maya's Navy SEAL background changed everything and nothing at the same time. The people sitting in Sarah Chen's office that morning looked at her with new understanding. But Maya was still the same person who had been living quietly in Millfield for the past month, helping wherever she could and asking for nothing more than the chance to prove herself. Word of her military service spread through the town with the same speed as every other piece of news in a small community. By that afternoon, Maya found herself fielding questions and comments from people who had never spoken to her before. Some wanted to thank her for her service. Others were curious about her experiences, and a few seemed almost intimidated by the knowledge that they had been sharing their town with someone who had operated at the highest levels of military special operations. The attention made Maya uncomfortable. She had revealed her background to explain her qualifications and character, not to become a local celebrity. She continued her teaching assignments and her quiet routines, hoping that the excitement would die down and people would return to judging her based on her daily actions rather than her past achievements. However, 3 days after the meeting in Sarah's office, Maya received a phone call that would force her to confront her past in a more public way than she had ever intended. Is this Maya Rodriguez? The voice on the phone asked. Yes, this is Maya. My name is David Kim, and I'm a reporter with the Columbus Herald. I understand you're one of the first women to serve as a Navy SEAL. I'd like to do a story about your transition to civilian life and your current work in education. Maya's heart sank. This was exactly what she had hoped to avoid. I'm not interested in doing an interview, she said firmly. I understand your reluctance, but this is an important story. There's a lot of public interest in how female special operators are adjusting to civilian careers. Your work in a small-town school system is particularly interesting. Mr. Kim, I appreciate your interest, but I've chosen to keep my military service private for good reasons. I'm not going to change that position. I can write the story with or without your cooperation, the reporter said. I'd prefer to include your perspective, but I have enough sources to proceed either way. After hanging up, Maya sat in her studio apartment and stared out the window at Main Street. She had known this day might come eventually. The military's pilot program for women in special operations had been highly classified, but as more details became public, journalists had been tracking down the women who had participated. Maya had managed to stay under the radar for 2 years, but apparently her luck had run out. She called Sarah Chun and explained the situation. What are you going to do? Sarah asked. I don't know. I moved to Millfield because I wanted to start over somewhere quiet, where people would judge me based on who I am now rather than what I used to do. If this story comes out, that becomes impossible. Maya, you've spent the past month proving to this community that you're exactly the kind of person we want living here. A newspaper article isn't going to change that. You don't understand, Maya said. Once this story hits, there will be other reporters, requests for interviews, speaking engagements, people wanting me to be some kind of poster girl for women in combat. That's not the life I want. That evening, Maya walked through downtown Millfield, trying to clear her head and figure out what to do next. As she passed familiar businesses and waved to people she was beginning to know, she realized how much this place had come to mean to her in just a few weeks. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she belonged somewhere. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the commotion coming from the direction of the river that ran along the eastern edge of town. As she got closer, she could see flashlights and hear voices calling out. A small crowd had gathered on the riverbank, and Maya could make out Sarah Chun among them. "What's happening?" Maya asked as she approached the group. "It's Tommy Brennan," Sarah replied, her voice tight with worry. He and two friends were playing near the river after school. One of them fell in, and Tommy jumped in to try to help him. Now both boys are missing. Maya looked out at the dark water. The river was swollen from recent rains and moving faster than usual. In the fading daylight, it would be almost impossible to see anyone who might be struggling in the current. "How long have they been missing?" Maya asked. "About 20 minutes, replied Officer Janet Martinez, the town's only police officer. "The fire department is on the way, but they're coming from the county seat. It'll be another 15 minutes at least." Maya was already pulling off her jacket and shoes. The water would be cold and dangerous, but she had trained for water rescues in conditions much worse than this. Every minute that passed decreased the chances that the boys would survive. "Maya, what are you doing?" Sarah called out as Maya waded into the river. "Those boys don't have 15 minutes, Maya replied, then dove into the dark water. The current was stronger than it looked from shore, and the water was shockingly cold. Maya let the current carry her downstream while scanning the surface for any sign of the missing boys. Her SEAL training kicked in automatically: controlled breathing, efficient swimming strokes, constant awareness of her position relative to the shore, and potential hazards. About 100 yards downstream, she heard a faint call for help. Tommy Brennan was clinging to a partially submerged log, barely keeping his head above water. He was clearly exhausted and close to losing his grip. Maya reached him within seconds. "Tommy, it's Maya from school. I'm going to get you out of here." "The other boy," Tommy gasped. "Marcus. I couldn't. I lost him. Where did you last see him?" Tommy pointed weakly further downstream. Maya made a quick decision. She helped Tommy grab onto a more stable piece of debris where he could rest safely, then continued her search for Marcus. She found the second boy about 50 yards further down, unconscious, and floating face down in a calm eddy near the shore. Maya reached him quickly, flipped him over, and checked for breathing. Nothing. She began rescue breathing while swimming toward shore, a technique that required perfect timing and exceptional swimming skills. By the time Maya reached the riverbank with Marcus, a crowd had gathered, including the volunteer fire department that had finally arrived. She immediately began full CPR while paramedics prepared their equipment. "Come on, Marcus," she whispered between compressions. "Stay with me." After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than 2 minutes, Marcus coughed up water and began breathing on his own. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Maya was already turning her attention back to the river where Tommy was still waiting for rescue. The fire department's water rescue team retrieved Tommy safely, and both boys were transported to the hospital for observation. They would make full recoveries, thanks to Maya's quick action and expert swimming skills. As the emergency vehicles drove away, Maya found herself standing on the riverbank, soaked and shivering, surrounded by most of the town's population. The story of what had just happened would spread quickly, but this time, Maya didn't mind. She had acted on instinct to save 2 children, and she would make the same choice again without hesitation. David Kim, the reporter from Columbus, called her the next morning. "Miss Rodriguez, I heard about what happened last night. You saved those 2 boys' lives." "The fire department and paramedics saved their lives," Maya corrected. "I just got them out of the water, using skills you learned as a Navy SEAL." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Kim, let me ask you something. What's more important, the fact that I was a SEAL or the fact that 2 boys are alive today because someone knew how to perform a water rescue?" "Both are important." "No," Maya said firmly. "What's important is that this community has people who look out for each other. What's important is that when there's a crisis, people step up to help instead of just standing around watching. What's important is that we judge each other based on our actions, not our appearances or our backgrounds." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "If you write a story about me," Maya continued, "make sure you mention that the same people who questioned whether I should be working with their children are the ones who called out encouragement while I was searching for those boys in the river. Make sure you mention that this community gave a stranger with tattoos a chance to prove herself, and that taking that chance benefited everyone." "I can do that," the reporter said. "But I still think your military background is newsworthy." "Then focus on what it taught me that I'm using now, that the most important thing you can do with your skills and training is use them to serve others. That's true whether you're a SEAL or a substitute teacher or someone who just knows how to swim well enough to help when kids get in trouble." The article appeared in the Columbus Herald 2 days later. The headline read, "From Navy SEAL to Small-Town Teacher, How One Veteran Found Home by Serving Others." The story focused not on Maya's classified military missions, but on her transition to civilian life, her work with students in Millfield, and her commitment to community service. The river rescue was mentioned, but in the context of someone using her skills to help others rather than as a sensational heroic act. More importantly, the article quoted several Millfield residents, including Carol Stevens and Mrs. Wellington, talking about how they had initially judged Maya based on her appearance, but had come to respect her for her character and actions. Tom Harrison was quoted saying that having Maya as a tenant had been one of the best decisions he had made as a landlord. The story attracted some attention from other media outlets, but Maya handled the additional requests for interviews by directing reporters to speak with the people of Millfield instead of her. She encouraged them to write about small towns that were willing to look past surface differences to recognize good people, and about communities that valued actions over appearances. 6 months later, Maya was offered a full-time position teaching health and physical education at Millfield High School. The school board voted unanimously to hire her, and several board members mentioned specifically that they wanted someone who could connect with students by sharing real-world experiences and demonstrating that people could overcome significant challenges. On her first day as a permanent teacher, Maya walked into her new classroom to find a banner that read, "Welcome home, Miss Rodriguez." It had been signed by dozens of students, parents, and community members. As she looked out at the faces of the young people she would be working with, Maya realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for since leaving the military. Not just a job or a place to live, but a community where she was valued for who she was, all of who she was, including the parts that had once made people uncomfortable. The tattoos were still there, as visible as ever. But now when people looked at them, they saw reminders of service, sacrifice, and strength rather than reasons for suspicion. They saw the story of someone who had served her country with honor and was now serving her community with the same dedication. Maya Rodriguez had learned that finding home wasn't about hiding who you had been or pretending to be someone different. It was about finding people who could see past the surface to recognize the character underneath, and then proving every day that their faith in you was justified. In Millfield, Ohio, she had found both the community she needed and the chance to be exactly who she was meant to be. The girl covered in tattoos had indeed become a legend, not just for what she had done as a Navy SEAL, but for what she continued to do as a teacher, neighbor, and friend who never stopped serving others.